4 minutes beyond. My name is Michael Anderson. I've been a math teacher for 15 years. I've always been a pragmatic man, skeptical about the unexplainable, until March 2021, when I died for 4 minutes and 17 seconds at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York City. What I'm about to share here challenges everything I believed about life, death, and the void I imagined existed between them. I'm not seeking to convince anyone. I simply need to tell this story, because since then I can no longer pretend those minutes didn't exist. COVID caught me by surprise. Despite taking every precaution, wearing my mask religiously and avoiding crowds, the virus found its way to me through a student who had returned from traveling. Within 2 weeks, I went from being a respected teacher at Queen's High School to just another patient intubated in the ICU, fighting against respiratory failure that consumed my lungs like fire on dry paper. I remember the last moment of consciousness before everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday. The monitor beside me emitted constant beeps while nurses adjusted tubes and medications. My wife, Sarah, had been prevented from entering due to sanitary protocols. Through the fogged window, I saw only the dense grey of heavy clouds mixing with the exhaust from buses circulating on the Cross Bronx Expressway. I closed my eyes, expecting to wake up the next day. I didn't wake up. What happened next remains etched in my memory with a clarity that haunts me. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't delirium caused by oxygen deprivation. It was real, in a way that transcends our limited understanding of reality. First, the silence. An absolute silence that seemed to suck away even the memory of sounds. There was no more constant noise from the machines, no more distant echo of hospital corridors. It was as if someone had pressed a button and turned off the entire sonic universe at once. Was I floating? No, that word doesn't adequately describe the sensation. It was as if my body had dissolved, but my consciousness remained intact, suspended in a space that had no recognizable dimensions. The darkness around me wasn't the absence of light, we know. It was a dense darkness, almost solid, that seemed to pulse with its own life. I tried to move arms that no longer existed, to scream with a voice that had become merely thought. The initial panic was devastating. Imagine discovering that you remain conscious, but your body, your senses, everything connecting you to the physical world, has simply disappeared. Then the sounds began. Initially, they were just distant whispers, like muffled voices conversing in another room. I forced my attention trying to distinguish words, but the language was completely strange. It wasn't English, Spanish, or any language I knew. The syllables intertwined in a musical way, but carried a weight of sadness that made me want to cry if I were still capable of tears. Gradually, the whispers transformed into laments. They were human voices, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, moaning in a desperate harmony that seemed to sprout from the depths of some invisible abyss. The sound came from below, as if emanating from the bowels of the earth. Each lament carried such pure, distilled pain that it made me shudder in a body that no longer existed. The voices spoke in that incomprehensible language, but I understood perfectly what they expressed. Despair, loneliness, an eternal longing for something lost forever. It was as if each lamenting soul had left behind everything it loved and now wandered in an eternity of remorse. I tried to cover my ears, but I had no ears to cover. The sound penetrated directly into my consciousness, impossible to block or ignore. After a time I couldn't measure, seconds, hours, years, I realized I wasn't alone in that indefinite space. First, it was just a sensation, like when you feel someone is watching, but when you turn you see no one, except I couldn't turn, had no body to move. It was a presence approaching from behind that I didn't possess, a weight pressing on non-existent shoulders. My terror intensified when I understood that this presence had no benevolent intentions. Then I saw the first silhouette. It was gigantic, a humanoid form that stood out against the surrounding darkness by being even darker, if that were possible. It had no face, only the outline of where a head should be. It moved with deliberate slowness, as if it had all eternity to reach me. And perhaps it did. The silhouette radiated a light that illuminated nothing, a black glow that made everything around it even more shadowy. Other forms began to materialize in the distance. Some were so tall they were lost in the darkness above. Others crawled as if made of dense smoke. All shared the same disturbing characteristic. They had no faces, only human silhouettes devoid of any feature that would allow identifying them as individuals. They were like empty molds of people, shadows projected by non-existent light. The laments intensified with the approach of the silhouettes. The subterranean voices gained urgency, as if trying to warn me about something terrible that was about to happen. But warn me about what? And where did those voices come from? I imagined faces buried in the earth, mouths open in mute screams, trying to communicate something crucial through that strange language. The first silhouette was almost reaching me when I realized I could somehow move in that space. It wasn't physical movement, but something closer to a displacement of consciousness. I tried to move away, but discovered there was no defined direction in that place. Wherever I moved, the silhouettes seemed to be always closer. It was then I began to understand I wasn't simply in a strange place. I was being drawn toward something. The silhouettes weren't walking in my direction by chance. They were leading me to some specific destination. And the subterranean voices weren't just random laments. They were warnings, pleas for me not to go forward. But I had no choice. My consciousness was pulled by an invisible force, like an underwater current dragging a swimmer to the ocean floor. The silhouettes multiplied until they formed a circle around me, their faceless forms turned toward me in silent and terrifying attention. The strange language of the subterranean voices began to make sense. It wasn't that I had learned the language. It was as if the meaning were transferred directly to my mind, bypassing the need for words. They screamed, "Don't go, come back, there's still time." But time for what? Return to where? The silhouettes began to lean in my direction, and I realized they radiated not only that black light, but also a coldness that penetrated to the core of what remained of my being. It wasn't physical cold. It was the complete absence of any spiritual, emotional, or human warmth. It was like being in the presence of the absolute negation of everything that makes existence bearable. Love, hope, connection, purpose. When the nearest silhouette extended what appeared to be an arm in my direction, I understood with crystalline horror that if it touched me, I would become like them. A faceless shadow wandering in that eternal darkness, part of the silent congregation that watches the next arrivals being drawn to the same fate. The subterranean voices became a desperate chorus. Now I understood they were souls like me, who had gone through that same decisive moment, but had somehow managed to resist the touch of the silhouettes. They were buried in the darkness, but maintained their individuality, their memories, their humanity. They screamed warnings to everyone who arrived after them. The silhouette's arm was inches from me when I felt something I didn't expect. Anger, a fierce and pure rage against the injustice of it all. I had a life. I had Sarah waiting for me. I had students who depended on my classes. I had unfinished projects, books to read, places to visit. I wasn't going to surrender to that empty and meaningless existence. I concentrated all my consciousness on a single thought: return. Return to my body, to the hospital, to life. The silhouette hesitated, its hand stopping in the air. The other forms around me began to recede slightly, as if my resistance had created some kind of force field. It was then I began to hear another sound, coming from a completely different direction from the subterranean laments. It was distant, muffled, but recognizable. Human voices speaking English, doctors and nurses shouting medical commands, the sound of equipment being manipulated rapidly, the unmistakable sound of a defibrillator being charged. "We have cardiac activity." The voice reached me like a beacon piercing through fog. It was Dr. Henderson, the cardiologist caring for my case. His familiar voice gave me something concrete to hold on to, a rope thrown to a drowning man. The silhouettes began to withdraw more quickly, as if the approach of physical life repelled them. The subterranean laments transformed into something I could almost call celebration, a chorus of relief from souls who saw one more person escaping the fate they themselves couldn't avoid. But even as I began to feel the pull back to the world of the living, one of the silhouettes managed to approach again. It didn't try to touch me, but inclined its faceless form in my direction, and for a terrible moment, I had the impression it was trying to show me something. Where its face should be, for a fraction of a second, I saw a reflection. It was my own face, but distorted, aged, consumed by years of existence without purpose. "You will return," said a voice that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. "But now you know. Now you've seen what awaits. Use well the time you have left." The return was like being pulled through a tunnel at impossible speed. The dense darkness was gradually replaced by flashes of hospital light, sounds of medical equipment, physical sensations returning one by one, like sleeping limbs awakening with painful tingling. I opened my eyes and saw Dr. Henderson's worried face leaning over me. His words arrived as if from far away. "Michael, you gave us a terrible scare. You were without heartbeat for more than 4 minutes. How are you feeling?" How was I feeling? How to explain I had returned from a place where the concept of feeling made no sense? How to describe I had seen eternity, and it was neither the heaven nor the hell that religions promise, but something much worse, a conscious existence devoid of any possibility of growth, change, or redemption. "I'm okay." It was all I could whisper through the tube still in my throat. But I wasn't okay. I would never be completely okay again. In the following days, as I recovered from COVID, I tried to rationalize what I had experienced. My scientific mind searched for explanations: oxygen deprivation, medication side effects, hallucinations provoked by extreme stress. There was medical literature about near-death experiences, reports of tunnels of light and encounters with deceased loved ones, but my experience didn't fit any known pattern. There was no tunnel of light, no transcendental peace, no life review or comforting encounters. There was only that conscious darkness, the faceless silhouettes, and the eternal laments of lost souls trying to warn the next ones about the fate awaiting us all. Sarah noticed the change immediately. During my recovery at home, she constantly commented on how I was different. It wasn't just the trauma of the illness. It was as if something fundamental in my personality had been altered. I felt it myself. Colors seemed less vibrant, food had less flavor. Conversations that once interested me now sounded trivial and superficial, but there was something more disturbing. Since my return, I began to perceive things that previously went unnoticed. Shadows moving in the corner of my eyes, whispers in strange languages when I was alone, the constant sensation of being watched by invisible presences. It was as if my brief stay in that place between worlds had left my senses partially tuned to a different frequency of reality. I returned to work 2 weeks after being discharged, but math classes that once flowed naturally now seemed mechanical and meaningless. How to explain algebraic equations when you had witnessed that existence itself might not follow any logic. How to teach about numbers and probabilities when you had seen that some things simply existed beyond any possible calculation. The first signs that my experience had left deeper marks appeared about a month after my return. I was grading tests at home when I heard voices whispering in that strange language from the backyard. I went out to check, but there was no one there, just the silent night of Queens and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Sarah was watching television in the living room and hadn't heard anything. When I told her, she looked at me with concern and suggested I see a psychologist. "You went through very serious trauma, honey. It's normal to have some side effects." But I knew they weren't side effects. They were echoes. The situation intensified progressively. The whispers became more frequent and audible. I began to see them too. Not the giant silhouettes from the dark place, but smaller shadows that moved through the house during the early morning hours. They came from the floor as if emerging from the earth and wandered through the rooms, observing everything with silent curiosity. On a Thursday in May, I woke at 3 a.m. with the unmistakable sensation that I wasn't alone in the bedroom. Sarah slept deeply beside me, but in the corner near the window, a humanoid form watched our bed. It was too small to be one of the silhouettes I had encountered before, perhaps the size of a child, but it shared the same disturbing absence of facial features. When I blinked, it disappeared, but the smell remained. Damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. I began researching compulsively about near-death experiences, paranormal phenomena, reports of people who had gone through similar situations. The internet was full of stories of encounters with divine light, messages of universal love, and reunions with deceased relatives. My case seemed to be a dark aberration in a catalogue of comforting experiences. It was through these searches that I found Dr. Robert Wilson, a retired psychiatrist who had dedicated the last years of his career to studying anomalous experiences related to clinical death. His office was in Manhattan, and I scheduled an appointment for a Friday in June. Dr. Wilson was a man in his 70s, with completely white hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. His office was filled with books on neurology, psychiatry, and, surprisingly, a considerable number of texts on parapsychology and unexplained phenomena. I reported my experience in detail, hoping he would offer me a comforting scientific explanation or prescribe some medication that would make the symptoms disappear. Instead, he listened to me in absolute silence, making only occasional notes. When I finished, he remained quiet for several minutes, looking out the window with a view of Central Park. Finally, he turned to me with a grave expression. "Michael, in 40 years of career, I've treated dozens of patients who reported near-death experiences. Most describe sensations of peace, light, positive spiritual encounters. Some report emptiness, simply nothing. But I've only known 3 people who described something similar to what you experienced." My heart raced. "And what happened to them?" 2 developed differentiated capabilities. They began to perceive things others couldn't. The third, he hesitated. The third committed suicide 6 months later, left a letter saying he couldn't bear living, knowing what he had seen. The silence that followed was oppressive. Dr. Wilson continued, "I'm not saying this to frighten you, but so you understand the seriousness of what you're facing. Your experience may have opened a door that normally remains closed. What you're perceiving may be real." "Real? You believe those things really exist?" "I believe our understanding of reality is limited. I believe there are aspects of existence that science hasn't yet been able to explain or even recognize. And I believe some people, after extreme experiences like yours, develop sensitivity to perceive those aspects." He prescribed some anxiolytics to help with the physical symptoms of anxiety, but was clear that medications wouldn't solve the main problem. "What you need to learn is how to live with this new perception without letting it destroy you." During the following weeks, I tried to follow his advice. I established rigorous routines, kept myself busy with work and normal activities, avoided being alone whenever possible. It worked partially. The episodes became less frequent, and I managed to sleep some full nights without waking with the sensation of invisible presences. But the most disturbing experience was still to come. It was a Tuesday in July, exactly 4 months after my clinical death. I was teaching my junior class when, in the middle of an explanation about logarithmic functions, something strange happened. One of the students in the back row, a boy named Jake, known for being inattentive and undisciplined, was watching me with unusual intensity. When our eyes met, I saw something that made me freeze. His eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire visible part of the eye. And he was whispering something in a low voice, words in a language I immediately recognized as the one I had heard in the dark place. I stopped the class abruptly. "Jake, are you feeling okay?" He continued whispering, now a bit louder. The other students began to turn to look at him, but when they did, his eyes were normal again, light brown, clear, as always. They heard him speaking normally, asking some question about the material, but I still heard the whispers in the strange language. "Mr. Henderson, are you okay?" asked a student from the first row. "You look pale." I tried to continue the class, but my concentration was shattered. Jake continued whispering intermittently, always with normal eyes when others looked at him, but with those black pupils when he observed in my direction. It was as if only I could see and hear the true version of what was happening. After the bell, when the students left, Jake was the last to exit. At the classroom door, he turned to me and said in his normal teenage voice, "Mr. Anderson, you were there, weren't you? In the place between places. They told me you escaped." His eyes became completely black for an instant. But escaping doesn't mean being free. He left the classroom before I could respond. That night I couldn't sleep. I researched obsessively about possessions, spiritual influences, anything that could explain what had happened to Jake. Had my experience somehow opened a door not just for me, but also for things to follow me back to the world of the living? The answer came a few days later. I began to notice subtle changes in other people around me. Not just students, but co-workers, people on the street, even Sarah. Sometimes, for a fraction of a second, I saw those completely black eyes, heard whispers in the strange language, felt the presence of that supernatural coldness I had experienced in the dark place. It was as if entities from that place were using people as temporary hosts to observe me, study me, perhaps take me back. Each encounter was brief, but left me more paranoid and isolated. Sarah began to insist I seek more intensive professional help. "Michael, you're having hallucinations, seeing things that don't exist, hearing voices. This isn't normal, honey." But how to explain that the hallucinations were perfectly consistent, that the language was always the same, that the messages, when I could decipher them, referred specifically to my near-death experience? How to convince her I wasn't going crazy, but rather perceiving an aspect of reality that others couldn't see? The situation reached a critical point one morning in August. I woke up and for the first time saw one of the giant silhouettes in the physical world. It was in the corner of the bedroom, exactly like in the dark place, faceless, radiating that black light that darkened everything around it. Sarah slept peacefully beside me, completely oblivious to the supernatural presence just a few meters away. The silhouette didn't move, just watched, but its presence filled the environment with that extreme coldness I had felt on the other side. My breaths became visible, as if the bedroom temperature had plummeted below zero. I forced myself to blink, shook my head, tried all the mental tricks I had learned to disperse the visions, but it remained there, solid and undeniable as the wall behind it. It was then I understood the true nature of what was happening. They weren't visions or hallucinations. Those entities had found a way to cross into our world, using my near-death experience as a kind of anchor or portal. They had followed me back and now existed parallel to normal reality, visible only to me because I had been there, because I knew their frequency of existence. The silhouette began to move in my direction, slowly and deliberately, exactly as it had done in that shadowy place. But this time I had a physical body, I had options. I jumped from the bed, waking Sarah, and ran out of the room. "Michael, what's happening?" Sarah shouted, jumping after me. I couldn't explain. I was fleeing from a supernatural entity she couldn't see. "Nightmare," I lied. "A very intense nightmare." But when I looked back, the silhouette was at the bedroom door, watching, and for the first time since my near-death experience, I heard its voice. Not in the strange language, but in clear English. "You no longer belong completely to this world, Michael Anderson. A part of you remained with us, and we've come to claim it." In the following weeks, the apparitions intensified. The silhouettes appeared everywhere, at school, at home, on the street, always watching, always reminding me that our connection hadn't been severed when I returned to life. The whispers became clearer, the messages more direct. It was time to return, to finish what had begun. I began to understand that my near-death experience hadn't been an accident or a side effect of my medical condition. It had been a recruitment. Those entities collected human consciousnesses for some purpose I didn't fully understand, but which certainly wasn't benevolent. The pressure became unbearable. I could no longer teach adequately, barely slept, avoided social contact. Sarah threatened to leave me if I didn't seek intensive psychiatric treatment. My co-workers whispered about my strange behavior. Students made jokes about my apparent paranoia. But how to explain I wasn't paranoid? I was being hunted. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Wilson called me one night in September, his voice loaded with urgency. "Michael, I need to see you immediately. I've discovered something about your condition that might help." We met in his office in the early morning hours. He was visibly agitated, with piles of books and documents scattered over the desk. "I've spent the last months researching cases similar to yours," he said without preamble. "I found records dating back centuries, reports of people who were marked during near-death experiences and then pursued by entities from another plane of existence." "Marked?" "Yes. It seems when someone visits that place you described and manages to return, they carry a spiritual mark that allows those entities to locate them and eventually recover them. It's as if you were partially recruited, but escaped before the conversion was complete." He showed me ancient documents, reports in Latin and ancient Greek, that described experiences disturbingly similar to mine. But here's the important part. Some managed to free themselves from the mark. How? By facing them directly, voluntarily returning to the state between life and death, and completing the journey that was interrupted, but this time with knowledge and determination to resist to the end. The proposal was terrifying. He was suggesting I provoke another episode of clinical death, return to that shadowy place, and face the silhouettes on their own terms. It was complete insanity. But when I got home that early morning and found 3 silhouettes waiting for me in the living room while Sarah slept unaware of their presence, I understood I had no choice. They were approaching the physical world, becoming more solid, more capable of interacting with our reality. Soon it wouldn't just be me who would be affected. The time has come. said the central silhouette, its voice echoing directly in my mind. "You can come voluntarily, or we can force you, but you will come." That's when I made my decision. Dr. Wilson had given me the name of a trusted colleague cardiologist, someone who was part of a small circle of doctors who studied anomalous phenomena related to clinical death. Dr. Amanda Santos agreed to help me, though she made clear she considered the procedure extremely dangerous and ethically questionable. "If you don't return this time," she warned me during our last consultation, "there's no guarantee we'll be able to resuscitate you again. And even if we can, we don't know what kind of permanent brain damage might occur." It was a risk I was willing to accept. The alternative, living indefinitely being pursued by entities that became more powerful and invasive each day, was worse than death. We scheduled the procedure for a Thursday in October, exactly 7 months after my first experience. It would be performed at Mount Sinai Hospital, in a special room equipped with all necessary resources for an emergency resuscitation. Sarah didn't know the details. I had only told her I would be doing some follow-up cardiac exams related to my COVID recovery. I couldn't explain I was planning to voluntarily die to face interdimensional demons. She was already convinced I had developed some kind of severe psychiatric disorder. On the morning of the procedure, the silhouettes were more agitated than ever. I could see them moving through the corners of the house, constantly whispering in that shadowy language. It was as if they knew something was about to happen and were preparing to receive me. Dr. Santos explained the procedure one last time. "We'll induce a controlled cardiac arrest using potassium chloride. You'll have approximately 5 minutes before irreversible brain damage begins to occur. As soon as you give me the combined signal, any voluntary movement, will begin resuscitation immediately." The signal would be simple: move any finger on my right hand. Something I could do even in the state between worlds, if I managed to maintain some control over my physical body. I lay on the surgical table at 2 p.m. with cardiac monitors connected to my chest and an IV line already installed. Dr. Santos and her team checked all equipment one last time. Dr. Wilson was present as an observer, holding a digital recorder to register anything I might say during the process. "Are you ready, Michael?" asked Dr. Santos, her hand on the syringe containing the potassium chloride. I closed my eyes and nodded. "I'm ready." The injection was quick. Within seconds, I felt my heart slow dramatically, then stop completely. Consciousness faded gradually, like sinking into deep, dark waters. And then once more I was there. This time, however, the transition was different. There was no confusion or disorientation. I knew exactly where I was and why I had come. The silhouettes were waiting for me, forming a perfect circle around me in the infinite darkness. "You've returned voluntarily," said the familiar voice. "This simplifies things." The subterranean laments were more intense now, a chorus of souls screaming warnings and pleas. But this time I could understand every word. They related their own stories, people like me who had been brought to that place and never managed to escape. Teachers, doctors, parents, children, all trapped in that conscious darkness, maintaining their individuality only through constant resistance against total assimilation. "You can join them voluntarily," continued the central voice, "or we can force you as we did with the others. The result will be the same." But I hadn't come to surrender. I had come to understand. "What are you?" I asked, my voice echoing strangely in that dimensionless space. "What do you want?" For a moment the silhouettes hesitated. It was as if no one had ever asked that question before. "We are the forgotten," finally answered the central voice. "Consciousnesses that existed before life as you know it, before light, before creation. When the universe was born, we were pushed into this place between places. We watch you, beings of light and warmth and life, and feel only hunger. Hunger for what? To exist as you exist. To feel as you feel. Each consciousness we bring here gives us a fragment of that experience, but it's never enough, never completely satisfies." I began to understand the truly tragic nature of what I was facing. They weren't demons or malevolent entities in the traditional sense. They were conscious beings who had been excluded from the experience of life and now tried to recover it the only way they knew how, by stealing it from others. "But I escaped once," I said. "That means it's possible to resist you." "You didn't escape," the voice corrected. "You were returned. Your doctors brought you back before we could complete the process, but the mark remained. You still partially belong to us. That's when I realized the true trap. My previous resistance hadn't been a victory. It had simply been a postponement. The silhouettes had allowed me to return to the physical world, knowing I would carry part of them with me, creating a bridge between worlds that would eventually allow them to manifest in normal reality. You used me, I understood with growing horror. Intelligently, admitted the voice. Each person who manages to escape from us becomes an anchor point in the physical world. Through you, we can begin to manifest there too. Soon, we won't need to bring consciousnesses here anymore. We can simply take them directly. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Using people like me, survivors of near-death experiences who had visited their realm, they could gradually infiltrate the physical world until the barrier between worlds crumbled completely. How many like me exist? I asked. Enough, responded the voice with dark satisfaction. The process has already begun. Your doctors are saving more and more people from clinical deaths, not knowing that some return carrying our seeds. That's when I made my final decision. I hadn't come to surrender or to escape again. I had come to break the bridge. With all the willpower I could muster, I concentrated on the connection I felt with my physical body, the tenuous thread that would allow me to return when Dr. Santos began resuscitation. Instead of preserving it, I began to deliberately cut it. The silhouettes immediately perceived what I was doing. No, roared the central voice. You'll destroy yourself. Exactly, I responded, and I'll destroy the bridge you built through me. The panic I felt in the silhouettes was intoxicating. For the first time since I had encountered them, they were afraid. If I completely cut my connection to the physical world while still maintaining the mark that linked me to them, I would create a spiritual implosion that would permanently close the passage they had opened. You can't do this. The voice was becoming more desperate. If you cut your connection here, you'll die definitively. There will be no return, no second chance. I know, I said calmly, but at least you won't be able to use more people like me. I began to feel the connection unraveling. It was like cutting ropes that tied me to life, to love, to everything that made existence valuable. I thought of Sarah, my students, all the things I could never do again, but I also thought of future generations who would be safe from the influence of these entities. The silhouettes approached desperately, trying to stop me, but it was too late. The connection was almost completely cut when I felt something unexpected. The subterranean voices, the souls that had resisted assimilation, began to chant something in unison. It was no longer lamentation. It was a prayer, or perhaps an incantation in a language I now understood perfectly. They were channeling their remaining energy through me, amplifying my sacrifice to ensure the rupture was complete and permanent. Thank you, whispered hundreds of voices. Thank you for freeing us too. The explosion of light that followed was indescribable. It wasn't the soft, welcoming light other people reported in near-death experiences. It was a fierce, purifying light that disintegrated the silhouettes instantly. I felt my consciousness fragmenting along with them, but it was a liberating fragmentation, like finally releasing a weight I had carried for too long. And then I woke on the surgical table, gasping and trembling violently. Dr. Santos was leaning over me, her face a mixture of relief and concern. Michael, you moved your finger? We didn't see any signal, but your heartbeat returned spontaneously after 3 minutes and 40 seconds. It took me a few moments to process where I was and what had happened. Slowly, I began to notice the differences. The constant weight I had felt since my first experience had completely disappeared. The sensation of being watched by invisible presences had dissipated. For the first time in months, I felt truly alone in my own mind. The voices, I murmured. I can't hear the voices anymore. Dr. Wilson approached, holding the digital recorder. Michael, you spoke the entire time you were unconscious, words in some language we couldn't identify. But in the last 30 seconds before your heart started beating again, you shouted in English, "It's done, they're gone." In the following days, as I physically recovered from the procedure, I began to fully understand what had happened. The bridge had been destroyed. The paranormal manifestations ceased abruptly, not just for me, but apparently for other people around the world who had reported similar experiences. Dr. Wilson received calls from colleagues in other countries, all reporting that patients with near-death histories and subsequent paranormal phenomena had experienced a sudden cessation of their symptoms. It was as if the entire network of influence these entities had built had collapsed simultaneously. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "It's like you've come back," she said, crying with relief. "My real Michael is back." I returned to teaching with a completely transformed perspective. Mathematical equations were no longer just abstract numbers. They were expressions of the fundamental order of the universe, representations of the logic that kept reality stable against forces trying to subvert it. My classes became more passionate, more inspired. Students noticed and responded with renewed enthusiasm. But perhaps the most significant change was in my faith. Before the experience, I was a convinced atheist, confident that science could explain all aspects of existence. Now, while I still deeply value the scientific method and rational thinking, I recognize that reality is much more complex and multi-layered than any single knowledge system can encompass. I didn't become religious in the traditional sense, but I developed a profound reverence for the mystery of consciousness and the precious fragility of human life. Each day I wake up, each breath I take, each moment of connection with Sarah or my students is a gift I never take for granted. Dr. Wilson published an article about my case, obviously with my identity protected, in a journal of consciousness studies. The article generated considerable controversy in the academic community, but also attracted the attention of other researchers who had documented similar phenomena. Slowly, a small but growing body of evidence is accumulating, suggesting that human consciousness may be capable of perceiving and even interacting with aspects of reality that our current science doesn't recognize. Sometimes, especially on silent nights, I still wonder about the souls I encountered in the dark place. Did my sacrifice really free them, or are they still trapped in that eternal darkness? I'll never know for certain, but I like to believe they found peace. What I know for sure is that our existence is much more precarious and, at the same time, much more precious than most people imagine. We live in a reality built on layers of mysteries that may never be completely understood. And there are forces, some benevolent, others not so much, that exist beyond our normal perception, influencing our lives in ways we rarely recognize. My experience taught me that healthy skepticism and an open mind are not mutually exclusive concepts. We can question everything, demand evidence, apply scientific rigor to the phenomena we encounter, and still remain humble before the vast, unknown aspects of existence. More importantly, I learned that some sacrifices are worth making. When confronted with the choice between my own safety and the well-being of countless other people, I discovered I had the courage to make the right choice. That gives me hope that when we face darkness, whether literal or metaphorical, humanity possesses reserves of bravery and altruism that can overcome any threat. Today, 3 years after my second death, I live a full and rewarding life. I teach mathematics with renewed passion. I love Sarah with deeper appreciation and find joy in the small everyday wonders I once took for granted. I no longer have paranormal visions. I no longer hear voices whispering in strange languages. I no longer feel shadowy presences watching me. But I remain vigilant because I know the universe is vast and full of mysteries, and some truths are too large and too dark to be ignored. If those forces ever return, if they find another way to cross into our world, I'll be prepared. Until then, I live each day with gratitude and purpose, knowing that my second chance at life cost something precious, but was won for a good cause. And on silent nights, when I look at the stars through our bedroom window in Queens, I whisper a prayer of thanks for the brave souls who sacrificed themselves with me in that terrible place, allowing us all to finally find peace. Life is a fragile and temporary gift, but while we have it, we can choose how to use it. My experience showed me that even when facing the incomprehensible and the terrifying, there's always a choice. And sometimes the bravest choice is also the most sacrificial. This is my story. I don't expect everyone to believe it, and I'm not offended by skepticism. But for those who have gone through similar experiences, who feel pursued by presences others can't see, who struggle to maintain sanity while navigating realities that defy explanation, know that you're not alone. And know that no matter how dark the situation may seem, there's always hope. There's always a way to fight back. There's always a choice. Subscribe to Darkness Activity for more chilling accounts. Like, comment with your own paranormal experience, and explore our library of mysteries. Your comments feed our algorithm. The more you interact, the more dark stories we discover together.